Today's webcast is on new grading workflows for residential or subdivision type projects. And it's going to be highlighting, for the most part, one of the new tools that's coming out from CTC called AutoGrader. My name's Brian Lewandowski. I'm going to be doing the presentation today. I'm the product manager at CTC here for all of our civil products. So a lot of what I've got to show you here today, I've been part of the team developing this stuff, and so I'm excited to show you what we've got today. We're releasing this in just a matter of days. We're just going through a number of final tweaks and bug fixes and things like that. So the build I'm showing you today is literally just hours old, so hopefully it doesn't crash on me. So with that, why don't we get started? And the first thing I want to talk about is what is residential grading like today in Civil 3D. And I know there's a ton of different workflows out there, but I'll just throw some of the common ones out there. When it comes to grading the roads, a lot of us may be using corridors to do that, and it works reasonably well for that. That's what corridors are set up to do. Some out there might be using corridors for grading out their lots. And while I've seen some cool workflows, for the majority of people, it's a fairly difficult thing to learn and to get set up. And it's a pretty tough learning curve to really make that work. And kind of your normal user out there with a mid-level experience, it tends to be harder to use corridors for lots. Grading objects are out there. They're okay for building pads, but they're pretty unstable, and they don't really serve the lot grading. You know, the side lots, and they don't really serve that very well. And so a lot of people use feature lines for grading out their lots. And while it's fairly straightforward, easy enough to learn the concepts, it can be quite time-consuming and tedious. And so among all kinds of other workflows in grading, what we're trying to address is this right here, specifically the lot grading. And so what AutoGrader is, if you haven't heard about it yet, it's a tool that allows you to do dynamic grading through linked feature line sets. And feature lines, they're pretty straightforward, right? They're break lines in a surface. The problem with them, as we just acknowledged, is that they're really slow to work with, and you're kind of editing point by point in this way. So what if we could link feature lines together such that if I changed, say, a primary one, a whole bunch of dependent ones could change with it, much like how a corridor works. But corridors are so set up for linear type projects. So you define parameters in grading families. It could be the slopes along your side lots, that kind of thing. You can refresh these families as designs change. AutoGrader will manage all your surfaces. It'll add break lines to those surfaces. It'll also manage your feature line styles, as well as the layers of all these feature lines that it's going to both create and manage. And then you can also save out these templates that, you know, I've got one here showing, say, a curb. We're going to do some different ones. But you can save those out so you can use them in other drawings and in other projects. So there's two primary types of families, grading families, we call them in AutoGrader. One is parallel, where you define basically a parent set of feature lines, like this blue one here. You define a set of parameters, and then it'll create as well as update any of those child feature lines. Those would be the green ones here. So I highlighted this a lot in a webcast we did a few weeks back in more of a commercial site grading scenario where we've got parking lots, where everything is kind of 3D offset type scenario. Well, no one wants to do 3D offsets all day long, so that's what this does, is it sets it up for you. And then the other one is a perpendicular type grading family. And this lends itself, among other things, to subdivision grading. Because we often have started with grading out the road, we have perhaps some preliminary grades along the right-of-way, and then we want to grade off of that to grade out our lots. And so what AutoGrader will do is it'll automatically generate perpendicular lines off of your right-of-way like this based on some slopes and offsets that you define. Now it can create these feature lines right off the bat, or if you already have the geometry laid out perhaps in 2D polylines, or you have it as feature lines already, they just haven't been graded, there's two options within that. So one is create and grade new, and much like the parcel tools, it would actually lay out all your lots and then also grade them at the same time. Really powerful. It's just oftentimes those steps are separated, laying out the lots in 2D versus grading them. And so that's what this grade existing scenario is for. So you can take existing geometry that perhaps doesn't have any grading applied to it, like I said, polylines or feature lines, and we can assign grade breakpoints along those side lots. And it really lends itself to a situation like this where we may not want a constant depth across all of these, so we might be extending these lots further out to the corner of the property, but they still might have the building pads landing in the same spot, and in that way running a grade existing would work well. And I'm going to give you a taste of both examples here today. We'll touch on the create and grade new, but then we'll spend a little bit more time with the grade existing scenario. The third one, and that's going to be coming real soon. Like I said, we're releasing AutoGrader in just a few days. The third one is going to be a template scenario. And one of the places it lends itself to is spelling out building pads specifically in a subdivision scenario. So that's going to be just a few weeks down the road, maybe a month or so, and the follow-up release to AutoGrader. But it will be this template scenario where you can define, say, a basement grading, and AutoGrader will automatically insert that template along your lot. Now, people grade things a lot of different ways in their subdivisions. Some of you may not be concerned with that in the same way. In fact, you can actually achieve some of that with this perpendicular scenario. So a lot of ways to use AutoGrader. I can't wait, in fact, to get it out into your guys' hands and see all the creative ways you guys use this. So with that, I'm going to jump into Civil 3D and try to give you a little bit of a taste of how AutoGrader works, specifically in residential projects. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this one where we don't have the actual 2D lot geometry, and we're going to generate that, and we'll also grade it at the same time. Then I'll jump to a scenario where we've got some lots laid out. They vary in size, but we want to then apply some grading to it. So AutoGrader will become a part of the Sim Project suite. And here it is right here. It'll be one of the primary tools. And when I launch this, I get a fairly simple form where I can define what we call grading families. And what I want to do is define a set of grading along this outside roadway here. So I'm going to click the plus button here, create a new grading. Here's that option where we see parallel or perpendicular type grading. We're going to do perpendicular. And we'll call this grading family outside lots. Now I can choose my parent feature lines. Okay, so these are feature lines that were defined already. In this case, it's the right of way. If it is a pond grading, it might be some kind of baseline to the pond, the top of pond, something like that, where you'll then spell out the rest of your pond. So I can select this in the drawing, this one right here. I could also choose a filter option if I wanted to grab many of them on the same filter or same layer, for example. I've just got the one, so I'm just going to choose that. I've got station control. So here's actually laying out the lot. So I'm going to say every 60 feet, we're going to go intervals. Those are all the stations. I could come out here and grab additional stations, snapping to wherever I want, and I can manage this list. But this is where it's going to create a perpendicular feature line everywhere along that right of way. We'll go to the right side of the feature line. I think that's the right side. You can always switch it and refresh your grading family and all the feature lines update. There's a formatting button here. And here is where we create and specify the styles and layers and the site that our feature lines will be generated from. So I've got a style in here called child, a layer. We're going to put this on lots outside. And then for the site, we'll put it in residential. And now I'm going to create basically the side lot grading pattern here. So this will be my house front. I go a distance slope at say 30 feet and up at a 5%. And notice as I do this, this preview shows up down here. So this is an elevation or a profile view of these side lot lines and what they'll look like. From here, I can do however many grade breaks I might want along there. And this would certainly vary. I'm going to run this across the whole right of way, but there's areas where you might have basements, you might have walkouts, and in that case, you would certainly have different types of grading patterns here. Now, the method we use, the first one I use distance at slope, but there's all sorts of options here. I can do distance to relative elevation, for example. Say we want to go down 2 feet. I can make a copy of that component. This will be house back, and that will be, let's say, -4. And then one more, we can go to the lot back, go 60, and we'll go at a -4%, okay? So that's defining the side grading. This is just representative. It's not necessarily a 2-scale preview, but it gives you a sense of what is going to be created, okay? Now, if I click run here, we should see a whole bunch of feature lines generated. And you can see right off the bat, it went to the wrong side, right? And this kind of highlights well the dynamic nature of AutoGrader. I accidentally had it on the right. I meant to go left side. So I can switch that. I can run it again. And then all those feature lines will move to the outside. So we can do both layout as well as grading right within here. And this is in this create and grade new. In a bit, I'll show you the grade existing option. Now I might want some back of lot feature lines here, okay? And what those are basically would just be connect the points at the back of these side lot lines. So you notice there's this checkbox over here for create parallel, and that's going to create a parallel at that grade break point so that we have a back of lot line. Let's go back to this formatting window here. If I click into here, now I start to see a few more options. So perpendicular, that's the first row, and that's basically all the perpendicular lines we generate. It'll put all of those on one layer, one style, and one site. And then anytime we have a create parallel, we have additional formatting options we could use. Now what's handy in here, you can just check on match default, and it'll take the default or what's set for the perpendicular option. I hit OK. If I click run on this, we should then see our back of lot line generate because I turned on create parallel. Now that's where we've got, right, when we've got a very standard kind of lot depth. You might do this for a portion of your road, and then another portion you might use grade existing, okay? But again, everything is dynamic, right? So changing this from say 60 to 80, making the lots deeper, I can run this again and everything pushes around with it. So this is at the core of what AutoGrader is. We're just automating the creation and updating of all these feature lines. We're not creating anything new. They're objects you're used to. They're feature lines. Okay, we're just giving you an opportunity to find some baselines, much like you would in a corridor, and then we'll do all the detailed grading with AutoGrader. If I save and close out of here, we talked about the surfaces. AutoGrader will manage your surfaces as well. So I can tell it to add these feature lines to the proposed surface. So I don't have to manually go select those after the fact. And then when I come back in, or when I go into the settings here, I've got my breakline settings, and I can choose my supplementing factors. And then I can choose weeding as well if I had too many vertices being created in there that I didn't want added into the surface. Notice on the main form here, we've got run as well. We also had it inside of the family editor. That's where we are running this here. But you can come out here, and as you build out more families, you can run any number of those to respond to changes you might have made to your parent feature lines, in this case, the right-of-way lines. You can even run all of them at once. So, okay, I set my surface. Let's click run again, and we should see all those feature lines get added into the proposed surface. I think I've got the right style on there. So we see that built. We'll close out of here. And there is that surface. Okay, we can grab this, take a look at an object viewer, and you'll get a sense of what we're creating there. Okay, so here's all that grading along the lots. Okay, so on and so forth. I can grade out the inside, the outside. I can do some pond grading with the parallel feature here. How you use this will really depend on your site, and there's a lot of flexibility to it. And the other thing to point out here is that you're not tied down. AutoGrader isn't necessarily going to do 100% of your grading to the very end, right? But if we can automate the vast majority of it, and then any tweaks that you might want to do manually on your own, it's simple enough because why? These are just basic feature lines. You can edit them after the fact. Now, if you do that, and then you go back to AutoGrader and refresh that grading family, it is going to wipe those out, okay? But any other feature lines that you might add to this surface, AutoGrader won't have any effect on those, and so you can do any kind of tweaking or manual grading you might want in that way. So that's kind of a simple scenario where we're just boom executing all these lots at once. Let's look at this other scenario and see if we can get through this a little bit here. So what I've got is an overall property boundary where I need to tie into. Okay, those are my grading limits there. Again, I have some right-of-way lines with some initial grades to assigned to them, and that's based on some road grading I'd already done. And then I even have some preliminary back of lot grades. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these lot lines and I'm going to grade these out with AutoGrader. And you notice these are just polylines right now. They're not feature lines, okay? But I had laid those out already. That's my, my 2D design. And now I want to take this and use AutoGrader to apply gradients just like we had done before, but not in a standard depth, right? I've got different lot depths and that kind of thing. And so let's see how that would work. Now, right off the bat, like I said, we've got polylines. Now, this works any kind of way. You can enter into AutoGrader with polylines and then run that grade existing option. Or if you had feature lines, we could do that too. So let's actually do that. Say these were all feature lines already. They weren't graded, but they were feature lines. I can then use AutoGrader to manipulate existing feature lines. It can do it with polylines. All it does beforehand is it simply converts them into feature lines and then does the grading you would otherwise. So a lot of different options here. I'm going to take my polylines right off the bat and turn them into feature lines. Got a style. We're going to use the selected entity layer. This is something I like to do. I like to have the formatting or the appearance of my feature lines be controlled by layers. And then I use styles to control behavior of the feature lines within the site. If you're not familiar with feature line style hierarchy, it's a really nice feature, and it basically controls which feature line will affect another one. And in this case, I've got a child feature line style. I'm going to hit OK to this. We're going to generate feature lines out of all of these. There's really no grading assigned yet, but there's feature lines there. And one of the things I had done was assign the style called child. And notice there are elevations already to this feature line. We don't have the slopes and everything that we want yet, but that feature line style hierarchy plays nicely into the workflow I'm doing here. So let's go to residential. I think I've got this in the residential site. Yeah, the residential site. You right click on feature lines, go to properties. Right in here, you've got on the options tab, your feature line style hierarchy. So I assign the style of child, which means any feature lines with the style parent will control at intersections, regardless of which one is edited. So I've got my right-of-way lines using the style parent. I've got my back of lot lines using the style tertiary. And then my child lines are, the back of lot lines are assigned parent to, and then my lot lines are assigned child, okay? And what it means is that those endpoints, those are connected to that right-of-way line, such that anything that happens to that right-of-way line, the front of these will just simply move with it. And then AutoGrader will be used to grade out the entirety of the lot. Now the workflow I've got here is that I'm going to manually control the back of the lots. And so what AutoGrader will do will be to put in the front of the house, the back of the house pad, those grade breakpoints in the side lots. So let's come back to AutoGrader here. I'll launch this. Notice that grading family that I made in the other drawing is not in AutoGrader anymore. So grading families save to drawings specifically because obviously they're very drawing specific. That being said, we could save these out. So as I make a family, let's make a new family right here. It's going to be a perpendicular one. As I define this, I can save this out to a JSON template. It's a text-based file, a universal file type. I could save those out for use in other projects. So let's go into our grading family. Let's do outside lots. Now I'm doing outside and inside, and then I'll do cul-de-sac, but depending on your site, you might be able to grab multiple feature lines at once to grade out a set of lots. It really, really depends on your site. I just want to give you guys kind of a taste of how this will work. So parent feature lines, again, I can select in drawing or grab by filter. Since we just have the one, we're going to select in drawing. The station range, I'm going to do the full stationing, but we could do a range if we wanted just particular lot types for part of the roadway and then another type for another section of the road. And then before we did this create and grade new, this time I'm going to do grade existing. And I'm going to use a filter to grab existing feature lines that we have out there. We've got some settings here about how it grades along these existing feature lines. This is important to note. If my lot lines are perpendicular to my right-of-way line, grading along the child feature line would be the same as normal to parent, okay? But we do have two options here. So along the child would be whatever distances I spell out in my grading family, it'll grade and measure along that child feature line, the magenta lines here. I could also choose a normal to parent feature line, which would be the right-of-way line, and then it would measure distance perpendicular or normal to that, and then put grade breaks in my my child feature lines. So it all depends on the project, the scenario you're in. A lot of residential stuff, right? We have lot lines perpendicular, so these are one and the same, but know that that option is there. How it's picking up feature lines, it'll only grab things that are within this fuzz factor. We have it defaulted kind of low here. And the one thing I have though is these feature lines are sitting at pretty low elevations, although it seems to be picking all of them up at 50. So we're getting 50 feature lines. So these are all these outside ones here. And then like I did before, I can simply spell out what I want this to look like. We can do that house mid, kind of like we did before. We'll go a relative elevation. I can copy that. So it's pretty quick to spell these out. And again, you can actually save them to a template, so you'll be able to reuse this stuff pretty quickly. Now, I don't want to specify a back of lot for these outside ones because, in fact, they're going right to the existing overall property line. And I've got that feature line controlling the back of lots. So all I want to do is be inserting 3 elevation points or grade break points along these lots at these distances right here. So I think I've got everything set here. I've got the formatting option again. Put those on the lots outside layer, right site, okay. And save and close this, and let's go ahead and run this. And it'll go ahead and insert, you're not gonna see it because everything's landing on the same layer, but if I close out of this, we'll see all these feature lines will have grade break points in them, okay. So none of that was there, but we've added all these grade breaks based on that new definition, okay. And there are those distances. There's at 4% at 30 feet. Then we went down 2 feet, down 6 feet. And then back here, this is just tying into the existing property line, okay? Now you might, in some scenarios, it's not gonna be the existing, it's gonna be something proposed like this, okay? But I think you get the idea here. Let's go back into AutoGrader. And as we build this out a little bit, you'll notice that it gets pretty easy that we can just take a family like this, we can make a copy of it. And then I have my entire same definition in here, but this one just happens to be inside lots. Well, maybe it needs to change a little bit here, the slopes, maybe where I'm offsetting from. It all depends on what my design is. I need to go into my filter here. This time we're grabbing lots inside. And I'm getting 0 feature lines, and it's because I need to grab different right-of-way lines. My parent lines are these ones right here, okay? So it's all about the relationship between the parent feature lines, right-of-way lines in our case here, and then the child feature lines. So now it's finding 47 feature lines because it is, they're within that fuzz factor of the parent feature lines, okay? So some terminology here, we've got families, and then within them we've got parent feature lines and child feature lines. There's no proprietary object types. Again, they're just Civil 3D feature lines. It's just how we're organizing it in AutoGrader. Can change our layer in here. What feature layer should these feature lines reside on? And if I run this, I think I've got it all set correctly. And close out of here. And now we see these lots being graded based on that right-of-way line there, okay? Now keep in mind this stuff is all dynamic, right? I can go back in here if I need to push those pads back a little bit, maybe my road grading changed, okay? Anything's possible there. Let's do the cul-de-sac lines here. It'll be a similar thing again. We can just make a copy of the inside lots. We'll call it cul-de-sac lots. And this time we'll grab this feature line here. Okay. And I know I'm glossing over some things. Okay, you guys are going to end up doing station ranges for different portions of these roadways, depending on what kind of pad you're building there. I do want to get built in here. This will be probably in a future release where we get some other methods in here that will automatically decide for you what kind of pad it would be, what kind of slope it would be, right? So it'll automatically insert a walkout versus a lookout based on some elevation parameters. Right now, it'll automate it for you. There just isn't that analysis built into it, but this is a tool we plan to continue to develop. We just want to get this initial release out to you guys. Okay, coming into my filter here, this time we want feature lines on the layer lots cul-de-sac. I think that's the right one. Yeah, so that's all the feature lines here. And save this and then run this, and we'll get same kind of thing. Okay, grading on those lot lines. Okay. Now, lots of different workflows. I just want to point out again here, we're not grading this last point here because that depth of the lot varies. And so what works well for this workflow is to leave yourself an independent feature line out here. You know, and AutoGrader is not managing this one. That would be for you to manage however you want. I have a bunch of vertices in there. You wouldn't need to keep all of those in there. In fact, I would delete some of those out of there. But the fact that this feature line has a style parent, and then these have a style of child, the backs and the fronts of the lots are going to float relative to the right-of-way line, and then these green lines back here. A lot of different ways to do it, but just want to give you a sense of kind of the workflow example that I have here. Let's jump back in here. We didn't assign our surface at all yet. So we can come in here and say, all of these should be part of the proposed surface, okay? And again, we have settings for each one. What will be the supplementing factors? And if I go ahead and run this, I'll run the outside lots here. And then we should see if I've got the surface style set correctly. Maybe not. Let me close out. This was one of the final things we were running through today, which was how things were adding into surfaces. And they apparently are not adding in correctly. Anyway, it's no different than grabbing these feature lines and simply dumping in the surface. You had seen me show it in this other scenario. Like I said, we're working through final kinks, and something with this grade existing scenario is not putting those in the surface. Obviously, we'll button that up before we release this. So I'll grab all those lot lines. I can simply add them into the proposed surface. Okay, and then we see all that grading. I can add my outer sight limits into the surface. Okay, these back of lot lines. Okay, and all of these are manually created feature lines, right? So AutoGrader doesn't have any influence on those. AutoGrader has influence on just these child feature lines created right here. Okay. So if we make a change to any of these, let's go into the cul-de-sac lots, for example. I can edit to these. Maybe these aren't basements like this. More lookouts. Okay. If I run this again, we should see some update to our surface. I might have to go and rebuild it, but you'll get the idea here. Okay. Close out of there. Let's go ahead and rebuild this. Shoot. Let's see that update. Anyway, what we're after there is that change in slope on the side lots there. So sorry about that. A couple of little kinks. Like I said, we're working through them as we get ready to release this. I want to show you kind of one other thing here, right? It's not just going to be that perpendicular grading that family type that you would use. You would use the parallel one, and you would use a combination of just regular feature line grading. Hopefully you're not having to do too much of that. But take, for example, a pond over here. I've got an initial baseline created. We can go ahead and create a parallel grading family. This one we'll call pond, and I'm going to select this cyan feature line out here. I've got some base elevations defined already. And then I can simply spell out my pond. Now notice with parallel grading, we've got not just right and left, but there's inwards and outwards. So in the case of closed feature lines like this, it can detect inwards or outwards. So you may not be thinking in terms of left or right with a closed feature line. That's why we have this in here. So I'm going to go inwards. We'll go a distance of, let's say, 10 feet and a negative 33%. Again, I've got my formatting options here. Let's save that. And then we'll add this into the proposed surface. And then I'm going to run this. We haven't run it yet, so we should see our feature line generated, as well as that new slope there, and then it added it to the surface. Okay. And again, everything's dynamic, right? So I make an additional slope in here. This is another 15 feet down at a negative 10%. Okay, if I run this, you'll see that update out here. Copy it again. And notice with parallel type grading families, there's an anchor point. So the first anchor point for the first one here is the parent feature line. That was the outside cyan one. So maybe this is slope 1. This is slope 2. So slope 2 is supposed to anchor to slope 1. And then this is slope 3, and this should anchor to slope 2, right? And then we get the right build that we're after. Now the way that worked out, it happened to the right happened to be inwards. But if you go and set these both accordingly, your preview will respond correctly. If I run this, you should see that update. Okay, if I save and close out of that, okay, and I've got some pond grading. Now other miscellaneous stuff where it's really kind of a unique independent decision, or like dropping a swale in here, okay, you can just continue to do that as you normally would. Coming in here, I'm gonna snap to this, right? We just create a feature line up at a 2%, up at a 2%, okay? And then you just add this in like you normally would, okay? And we can control that, putting in swales, berms, however you might want. So AutoGrader, you're not locked into this. You don't have to get everything accomplished through AutoGrader. But I expect that you're going to be able to do 85 to 90% of your feature line editing and grading with AutoGrader. So one last thing, we'll I'll show you the other tool that we are releasing. I highlighted this last week, a lot of different workflows on it, but Label Genie is an automatic labeling tool. And it's very relevant in residential workflows like this where we've got spot elevations we perhaps want to put out here. Well, Label Genie will do that for us. So we can label feature lines. We can anchor to the vertices of those feature lines. And then we can make sure to go to the proposed surface. We check out the vertices here. I can check on all of these vertices. I go back into my required object here. A surface spot. Let's go into feature lines here. We're grabbing 145 feature lines. I think I've got it set right here. Anyway, I'm just going to drop a bunch of spot elevations in here. So every one of those grade break points, a lot of surface spot elevation. It's going to tell us it's going to add all of those in there. I went a little crazy with it. I did it at every midpoint and everything, but you have that control on the vertices. So these are surface spot elevations reading from the FG surface. Okay, and it drops in automatically. Now, like AutoGrader, this is all dynamic. So when you decide, well, I don't need curve midpoints and low points and so on, okay, you can update that. And now instead of 1,500 labels, we have 760. And it would only be adding those. I added all of them right off the bat, so I got too many in there to start with. So what it would actually look like would be like this. We have curve midpoints off. We add these in. And then we should be getting just those grade breakpoints like that, okay? So Label Genie plays into residential grading workflows quite a bit as well. We can put slope labels in here, all kinds of stuff. So that is what I wanted to show you guys today. I've got just a few more things to mention to you. And then I'd like to take any questions that you guys might have on this. So some of you might be wondering, how do I get this? It's releasing within just a few days. We've got everything worked out for our initial release. So you saw a couple bugs with the surfaces there. It's going to be part of the Sim Project Suite, as I mentioned. And for current license holders, you simply go and get the new installer. You can download it from the About menu in any one of the tools. Run the new installer and you'll get the new tools. You don't have to pay extra for them. And if you don't own the Sim Project Suite, get in contact with our resellers. That's HEG in the US or SolidCAD in Canada. So thanks again, everyone. Have a good day, have a safe week, and take care.